Why would a commander order her weapon taken away before she had even fired a single round? The words cut through the desert heat like a verdict. Take her weapon. Don't ask why. No one hesitated. 5 instructors closed in, circling her, as if she were some mistake that had wandered into their ranks. But what happened over the next 83 seconds would burn into memory like shrapnel lodged under skin. Assumptions shattered. Reputations crumbled. And a quiet woman named Kess, the one they dismissed as an error in the system, revealed herself as something no manual, no protocol, had ever prepared them for. But before we reach those 83 seconds, you need to know why her story still feels dangerous to tell, why files vanish when her name comes up, why men who once mocked her avoid speaking her name even in private, because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks into a room unnoticed, then rewrites the rules before anyone realizes they've changed. The convoy that carried Kess rattled to a halt at Southgate Sector 9. The sun was already merciless, clawing its way through metal and glass, baking the line of nervous candidates packed inside. 17 of them in total. 17 young faces painted with caffeine and fear, scanning the landscape that would break most of them in days. They wore the same expression: clenched jaws, darting eyes, and eagerness laced with dread. All except one. From his shaded platform above, Sergeant Trey Danner noticed immediately. One candidate didn't fit, she didn't even try. Civilian boots. A plain gray shirt instead of regulation prep gear. No insignia, no attempt to blend in, and she moved differently. Not arrogant, not timid, just steady. Her eyes scanned the compound like she had already been here before. Exit routes, glass reflections, blind angles. Every detail counted, and she counted every detail. Danner narrowed his eyes. Who the hell walks into Echo training like they've already passed it? Her file said Kess. Too clean. No commendations, no black marks, just vague postings. 7 pages lighter than most recruits' disciplinary records. Commander Mara Quinn had flagged it weeks earlier, uneasy. One line at the bottom had chilled her in a way she didn't admit out loud. Previous clearance level, Echo Black archived. She had never seen that attached to a living candidate. And when Quinn dug deeper, the strangeness grew. Eden's emergency contacts weren't blank. They were scrubbed, deliberately. Someone had gone in and carved pieces of her life out of existence. And yet there she was standing in formation, calm and silent, her boots dusty but her presence unshakable. Danner muttered under his breath, "She's not green, she's just covered in dust." He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, the rules of his world had already been broken. At Camp Grayson, weakness wasn't tolerated. It was hunted. Sympathy wasn't considered kindness. It was considered a flaw, and Trey Danner made sure every recruit understood it. That morning, when the candidates lined up for their first outdoor assessment, the desert heat hit them like a wall. The tarmac shimmered, the air heavy with punishment. Danner stood waiting on the edge of range Echo 7 like a lion surveying prey. Every obstacle around them, the walls, the pits, the weighted climbs, had been engineered not to test skill, but to expose ego, to rip away illusions until nothing was left but raw nerves. Most of the recruits looked the way Danner expected, wide-eyed, jittering, eager to impress, all energy, no edge. Then there was her. She didn't fidget, didn't sweat more than necessary. She didn't even blink when Danner barked in her face. Her stillness was unnerving, like a sculpture that could move if it chose to. But she wasn't invisible to everyone. Standing 2 places down the line, Private Ren Bishop felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck. Bishop wasn't the type to speak much. Growing up third of 7 kids had taught her to listen first. But something about this woman in civilian boots made her uneasy. The way she moved, efficient, deliberate, was too polished. She never stumbled over new protocol. She didn't need to watch the others to know what came next. Bishop couldn't explain it, but she felt it in her bones. This woman had been here before. Maybe not at Camp Grayson, but in places that looked and felt too much like it. The first weapons drill should have exposed a fraud. The XM9 adaptive rifle field strip, clean, reassemble. 15 minutes. Most recruits fumbled under the pressure. Some panicked. Others powered through, clumsy but determined. Eden approached the weapon like it was foreign. Her hands lingered too long, her motions almost hesitant. To Danner, she looked like she didn't belong. That was what he wanted to see, but Bishop noticed what he didn't. The hesitation wasn't real. Each motion was muscle memory disguised as uncertainty. Her fingers knew exactly where to press, where to pull, where to apply pressure. She completed the drill in just under 6 minutes, half the time allotted. And she still wore the mask of a struggler, hiding what she could actually do. The realization chilled Bishop more than it impressed her. Who hides being that good? Who pretends to be worse than they are? But Danner missed it, or refused to see it. Each day after that, his harassment became sharper, more personal. He pressed her in front of the others, mocked her civilian softness, waited for her to snap. But Eden didn't. She didn't argue, didn't show anger, didn't even show fatigue. Her responses were the same every time. Yes, Sergeant. Understood, Sergeant. Not robotic, not submissive, just unbreakable. Bishop had seen people crack under far less, but Eden absorbed it all like stone against the storm. The numbers told their own story. Bishop had started timing her runs, 7 minutes 45 seconds per mile, every time, day after day, like math, like calibration. That wasn't fitness, that was precision. And that precision began to bleed into everything. The shooting range revealed it most clearly. The heat shimmered, distorting the targets. Recruits flinched, cursed, missed wide. Danner stationed himself right behind Eden, arms crossed, smug grin ready to fire at the first mistake. She raised her rifle slowly like she didn't quite trust herself. Fired once. Again. Again. When the target reeled back, Danner's smirk faltered. 5 shots, 1 hole. Dead center. Range instructor Frank Voss, a man who had trained special ops for 2 decades, went pale. He'd seen groupings like that only a handful of times in his career, and every one of those shooters had their names erased from the public record. But Danner waved it off. Luck. He couldn't allow himself to see what was right in front of him, because if he did, then everything he thought he knew about control, about dominance, would collapse. So he clung to the lie. It wasn't until hand-to-hand drills that Bishop realized the truth was far bigger than she had imagined. Eden was paired with Delaney, a wrestler built like a wall of concrete. Danner barked for them to demonstrate the basic takedown. Eden moved hesitantly like she was still learning. Delaney went down, hard, too hard. But Bishop had been watching closely. The hesitation was fake. Right before the move, Eden had shifted her weight by millimeters, adjusted her grip with surgical precision. That wasn't a mistake. That was mastery disguised as compliance. And when Danner stepped in, criticizing her for not using enough force, Eden just nodded. Quiet, calm, but her eyes said something different. I've done this before, against people who mattered. Day after day, the same pattern repeated. She gave them nothing to hold against her. No pride, no weakness. She was smoke in a battlefield full of fire. But no one knew what she was really preparing for. And then week 4 arrived. Major Harrow called it the reality check drill. Everyone else knew what it really was, an execution wrapped in rules. 1 recruit against 5 of Camp Grayson's best. Survive 30 seconds or you were done. No appeals, no transfers, just a scar on your record that followed you like a shadow. That night, as the announcement spread, whispers filled the barracks. Candidates sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down like a storm no one could escape. And Eden. For the first time, she smiled. Not defiance, not arrogance, but something quieter, something that sent Bishop's stomach into knots, like someone hearing an old melody no one else could. They had chosen her for execution. But Bishop felt it deep down, an ache she couldn't silence. They had chosen the wrong person. What happens when a system built to break people collides with someone it can't? The night before the drill, the air inside the barracks felt heavier. Candidates lay on their bunks, too tired to talk, too restless to sleep. Fear has a way of spreading quietly like smoke under a door. No one said her name. They didn't have to. Everyone knew who the target would be. Kess. Private Ren Bishop sat upright, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. She tried to quiet her own breathing, but the unease was a drumbeat in her chest. She had watched Eden closely for weeks, studied her in ways no one else had. And something inside Bishop told her that tomorrow wouldn't play out the way the instructors expected. She thought back to the weapons drill, the silent perfection, to the runs timed with precision that felt less like fitness and more like calibration, to the scars on Eden's arms, faint but undeniable, glimpsed when sleeves rolled too far. Those weren't training accidents. Those weren't clumsy mistakes. They were maps of survival. And now, tomorrow, 5 hand-picked predators would be sent to tear her apart. Bishop wanted to warn someone, but what would she say? That Eden had been hiding her true skill, that she wasn't who her file said she was, that her hesitation was a mask. No one would listen. Danner would laugh in her face. Harrow would remind her she hadn't earned the right to speak. So Bishop stayed silent. At 300 hours, the floodlights cut across the compound. A horn wailed. Boots hit the ground in unison. The reality check drill wasn't just another test. It was theater. Everyone would be there. Officers who never showed their faces during training now lined the perimeter, arms folded, waiting for the spectacle. Medics prepped their kits. Notebooks flipped open in the observation tower. And at the center, Kess. She walked out from the equipment bay with the same unhurried steps she had used since day one. But something was different now. The stillness around her wasn't passive anymore. It carried weight, authority. Her movements were precise, every step measured like punctuation in a language only she knew. The recruits whispered as she passed. Doesn't even look nervous. She's dead in 30 seconds. Bet she doesn't last 10. Bishop didn't join in. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast, something she wasn't supposed to see. Major Harrow stepped forward, a silhouette under the floodlights. His voice carried like a sermon. This is where we separate the pretenders from the real thing. He let the silence stretch, feeding the tension, before locking eyes on Eden. Kess, you've struggled with basic competencies since day one. Let's see if your civilian life left you with anything useful. Gasps, a few muffled laughs. Everyone knew what this was, not a drill, not a test. A public execution dressed up as doctrine. Eden didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head. She didn't plead. Instead, for the first time since she'd arrived, she spoke with a voice that carried. When this is over, she said evenly, will you admit you never knew what you were looking at? It wasn't louder than Harrow's, but it was heavier, like the words were carved into the desert air, meant to linger long after sound faded. The crowd shifted uneasily. Danner scowled from his post. He had spent weeks trying to break her, weeks mocking, prodding, testing, and she had given him nothing, no weakness, no pride, just silence. Now her voice had landed like a challenge he couldn't swat away. The 5 men chosen to fight her began their warm-ups. Shinoda, Clem, Bram, Merrick, each one hand-picked, each one elite. They stretched casually, joking among themselves, the confidence of apex predators who already believed the outcome was written. But Bishop saw something different. When Eden rolled her sleeves, scars lined her forearms like forgotten coordinates. Bullet paths, surgical traces, shrapnel kisses, each one healed but never erased, and above her wrist, partially hidden under fabric, something else. 6 parallel lines, one crossed out. Bishop's stomach dropped. She didn't know what it meant, not fully, but she saw Commander Mara Quinn stiffen on the perimeter. Quinn's eyes widened just for a second before her expression sealed shut. She knew. Harrow lifted his whistle. No weapons, no eye gouging, stay standing or surrender, that's it. He smirked, savoring the silence. Any last words, Kess? Eden tilted her head just slightly. Only this, she said. You're measuring me by the wrong scale. The recruits murmured. Some laughed, but Bishop couldn't. The air around her felt charged, as if lightning was waiting just above the floodlights. The whistle blew, and the desert exploded. Shinoda came first, all 230 pounds of him, barreling forward like a freight train. His shoulder lowered, momentum unstoppable. If he connected, it was over before it began. But Eden wasn't there. At the last possible moment, she stepped 8 inches to the left, not retreating, redirecting. Shinoda's bulk surged past into empty space. Eden's hand brushed the base of his neck, just once, clean, surgical. His body betrayed him instantly, legs folding, strength evaporating. He collapsed into the sand, blinking at a sky that no longer made sense. 5 seconds. Bram and Merrick were next, charging from opposite sides. Years of practice, coordination, angles perfected, but Eden moved like absence itself. Their paths collided mid-sprint, crashing into each other with bone-cracking force. Before they could recover, she was already on them. A palm strike to Bram's shoulder. His arm went dead. A kick to Merrick's knee. Locked. Done. 12 seconds. Clem tried to adapt, ducking low, aiming to sweep her legs. He was fast, calculating. But Eden rose above him like smoke, her knee colliding with his temple with terrifying precision. He crumpled instantly, unconscious before he hit the ground. 17 seconds. Only Novik remained, the strategist, the predator who waited for openings. But now even he was shaking. His hands twitched. His stance faltered. He wasn't staring at a sparring partner anymore. He was staring at something he didn't have a word for. She wasn't fighting. She was expressing something. Violence wasn't technique for her. It was language, and only she spoke it fluently. Novik hesitated, then stepped back. I yield, he whispered, barely audible. Silence thick as dust. Eden didn't smile, didn't gloat. She moved among the fallen, checking them one by one. Her touch was clinical, careful, ensuring no permanent damage had been done. Only pride had been shattered. And then from the second row, a sound broke the silence. Clapping. Private Ren Bishop. Soft at first, then louder. Others joined, then more, until all of Range Echo 7 was on their feet, not celebrating, recognizing. They weren't applauding a victory. They were acknowledging a truth. For weeks they had stood in the presence of something extraordinary, and been too blind, too arrogant, too conventional to see it. Eden slung her bag over her shoulder, picked up her towel, and walked away with the same quiet steps she had on the day she arrived. Except now, everyone finally understood what they were watching. Within hours she was gone, quietly reassigned, her file sealed again, her true past buried deeper. But those 83 seconds would echo through Camp Grayson for years, not as a drill, not as a test. As a redefinition of what deadly truly looked like. What happens after someone shows you the impossible? Do you pretend it never happened? Or do you admit that your world just changed? At Camp Grayson, the official record said nothing. No entry logged, no drill documented, no footage archived. The reality check had never happened, at least, not on paper. But the silence left behind was louder than any report could have been. The recruits whispered anyway, not in groups, not openly, but in fragments. A muttered line over breakfast, a glance exchanged during formation. They couldn't agree on what they had seen. Some said she cheated, that the drill had been rigged. Others swore it had been a trick of timing, luck, coincidence. But most didn't even try to explain. They just called it what it was. 83 seconds. Private Ren Bishop replayed it in her head again and again, even when she tried to sleep. Each movement, each strike, the precision, The way Eden never looked like she was fighting for survival. She looked like she was remembering choreography written years ago. And what haunted Bishop most wasn't the victory. It was the smile, that strange, quiet contentment right before it began, as if Eden hadn't been dreading the fight at all, as if she'd been waiting for it. By morning, Eden was gone. Her bunk stripped bare, her name erased from rosters, her files sealed tighter than before. The instructors told the recruits not to ask questions. Reassignment, they said curtly. Advanced instruction elsewhere. But their eyes betrayed unease. They hadn't expected her to walk away. They had expected her to break. Commander Mara Quinn knew better. She sat alone in her office, the file open on her desk. The faint glow of her desk lamp lit the single line that refused to leave her thoughts. Clearance, Echo Black, archived. She traced the words with her fingertip, not because she needed to read them again, but because they felt like a warning. She had seen the tattoo too, 6 parallel lines, one crossed out, Phantom Unit. Ghost soldiers whispered about in briefing rooms and denied in every report. Operatives who completed missions no one acknowledged, who disappeared when they were no longer useful. But they weren't supposed to exist anymore. Quinn leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pressing down like weight. She wanted to dig deeper. She wanted to know what Eden had been, what she had survived. But some instincts are older than curiosity, and one of them was telling her, stop, don't ask, don't look further than you're allowed. Because if Eden Kess had come back from the dead, it meant someone somewhere had wanted her gone in the first place. Bishop didn't have that instinct. She sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the empty space where Eden's bag had been. The silence was unbearable. Training went on, but it felt hollow now. Every drill, every lecture, every barked order, none of it carried the same weight, not after seeing someone operate beyond it all. During mess, Bishop tried to ask Sergeant Danner where Eden had been reassigned. He sneered, slammed his tray down, and told her to shut her mouth. But his eyes weren't arrogant anymore. They were unsettled. The memory of those 83 seconds had carved something out of him too. That night, Bishop broke curfew. She slipped into the admin wing, heart hammering as she forced her way into the file room. Most of the cabinets held nothing but mundane records, logistics, meal plans, fitness reports. But Eden's folder wasn't among them, not where it should have been, not anywhere. Then she saw it, a drawer locked twice, tagged with an innocuous label, Archive. Her hands shook as she picked the lock. Inside, only 3 folders, 2 marked with red warning slips. One plain. She slid it open. Eden Kess. Except it wasn't really a file, just a single sheet. Name, date of birth. Assignments listed only as acronyms. Entire sections blacked out with thick redaction lines. At the bottom, one word that sent chills through Bishop's spine. Observe only. She snapped the folder shut, shoved it back into place, and relocked the drawer just as footsteps echoed down the hall. She darted into the shadows, holding her breath as 2 officers passed. One of them muttered under his breath, "She wasn't supposed to be here. Tell me about it, if command finds out." The voices faded. Bishop stood frozen for a long moment, then slipped back to the barracks, her heart still pounding. She knew nothing more than before, and yet she knew too much. Eden wasn't a mistake. She wasn't a fluke. She had been placed at Camp Grayson deliberately, but by who and for what Bishop couldn't say. Sleep didn't come. When the sun rose again, Bishop dragged herself to formation. Training resumed like nothing had changed, but the air was different. The instructors seemed harsher, more distracted. The recruits were quieter, and Bishop, watching the empty space where Eden used to stand, felt something stirring inside her. Not fear. Not awe. Something closer to obligation. Because she realized the truth. Someone like Eden didn't just disappear. Someone like Eden had unfinished business. Later that day, Bishop sat alone by the range, her rifle across her knees. She tried to steady her breathing to focus on her own drills, but her hands trembled. She thought about the way Eden's shots had torn one ragged hole through the target, how effortless it had seemed. She wanted to understand, not to copy it but to grasp the discipline behind it. She raised the rifle, aimed and fired. The shots scattered, inconsistent. She closed her eyes, tried to imagine how Eden had felt. Calm, deliberate, not trying to impress, just remembering. She fired again, this time tighter, still not perfect, but better. The sound of footsteps behind her made her stiffen. She turned. Commander Quinn stood watching, arms crossed. "You're chasing ghosts, Private," Quinn said softly. Bishop swallowed hard. "With respect, ma'am, maybe ghosts are the only ones worth chasing." For a long moment, Quinn didn't reply. Then she sighed. "Forget her. Focus on your training. She's not your responsibility." But even as she said it, her tone betrayed doubt. Bishop nodded because she had to, but inside she made a decision. She wasn't going to forget. Not Eden, not the scars, not the 83 seconds. Because deep down she knew Eden hadn't been tested at Camp Grayson. She had been revealed. And people who get revealed like that don't fade quietly. They come back. The only question was when. And why? Why would someone erase a person right after she proved herself undeniable? That was the question Ren Bishop couldn't shake. Training at Camp Grayson continued like clockwork. Runs at dawn, drills at midday, hand-to-hand until muscles screamed. But there was a hollow space in every formation, a gap no one filled. Instructors avoided it. Recruits pretended not to notice. But Bishop felt it every time. Eden's absence wasn't a wound. It was a silence. And silence has a way of demanding answers. 2 weeks after the 83 seconds, Bishop finally broke. She cornered Sergeant Danner after a grueling obstacle course, her uniform drenched in sweat, lungs burning. He was barking at another recruit when she stepped in front of him. Where did she go? He blinked, startled by her audacity. Who? You know who. His jaw tightened. For the first time since Bishop had known him, Danner looked rattled. He leaned close, voice a low snarl. You want to survive here, Bishop? Then forget her. Forget she was ever here. That's an order. But the thing about orders is, they only work when the soldier believes in the one giving them. And Bishop didn't, not anymore. That night Bishop slipped into the motor pool, ducking past guards, heart pounding in her throat. She had learned to move quietly, childhood habits, slipping past siblings in a crowded house became survival here. She wasn't looking for weapons or supplies. She was looking for records, movement logs, convoy manifests, anything. And she found it. A single sheet half crumpled under a stack of requisition forms. 4 words stamped in black. Transfer Kess Eden, location redacted. Her hands shook as she folded the paper, slipping it into her sleeve. Proof. Not answers, but proof. Eden hadn't been dismissed. She hadn't washed out. She had been moved. But where and why? The questions gnawed at Bishop until she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, hearing again Eden's quiet challenge before the drill. When this is over, will you admit you never knew what you were looking at? Bishop whispered into the dark. No, not yet, but I'm going to. Miles away, Eden Kess was stepping out of a convoy into another desert. Different sand, different heat, same silence. She had been reassigned to a facility without a name, tucked behind ridgelines and barbed wire. To the untrained eye, it looked abandoned, a scattering of old hangars, paint peeling, windows cracked. But beneath the surface, tunnels ran deep. Corridors carved into stone, steel doors that only opened with palm and retina. Inside, she was greeted by Commander Vexley. You weren't supposed to make a spectacle of yourself, Vexley said flatly. Eden said nothing. You were supposed to stay invisible, blend, observe, that was the assignment. Still nothing. Finally, Vexley's expression cracked. You think you embarrassed Harrow, Danner, you embarrassed the system. You reminded them there are levels of warfighting they don't control anymore. Eden's eyes stayed fixed ahead, calm, patient. Vexley exhaled. You were meant to be dead, Kess, don't forget that. The words landed like stone, but Eden didn't flinch, because she didn't forget. She remembered every operation, every name erased, every scar etched into her arms like coordinates of pain. She remembered what it felt like to be disposable, and she remembered what it felt like to wake up when the world thought you'd been buried. She didn't say it out loud, but the truth lingered in her silence. I was never supposed to be here, and yet here I am. Her reassignment wasn't training. It wasn't instruction. It was containment. Keep her where they could see her. Keep her out of sight from the rest of the military. Use her only when no one else could. And so the missions began. No uniforms, no insignia, no acknowledgement, inserted into conflicts that didn't officially exist, villages under siege, smuggling routes buried in mountains, shadows where diplomacy had already failed. She moved through them like the ghost they wanted her to be, efficient, surgical, silent. Her name was never attached to reports. Her presence never logged. She left no trace but the absence of enemies who had been there the day before. But silence is dangerous, and so is memory. Back at Camp Grayson, Bishop couldn't let go. She began noticing patterns in the instructors' briefings, references to operations that weren't in their training manuals, oblique mentions of field lessons drawn from unnamed operatives. She pieced them together like fragments of a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a truth no one wanted her to see. It all pointed to one thing: Eden was still out there. One night, Bishop confided in the only person she thought might understand. Private Delaney, the same recruit Eden had dropped in seconds during the drill. He had limped for weeks after that, pride more bruised than body. "You ever think about her?" Bishop asked quietly. Delaney scoffed. "Every damn night." "Don't you wonder where she went?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "You don't ask questions about people like that. You survive, you move on." "But what if moving on means becoming blind?" Bishop whispered. Delaney didn't answer. He just stared at her, eyes haunted. It was then Bishop realized the difference. Most recruits wanted to forget Eden because remembering her meant confronting their own smallness. But Bishop couldn't forget. Not because of pride, but because she felt tethered. As if Eden had left her with an unfinished sentence, a responsibility she hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Eden's missions carved further scars into her silence. Villages saved, convoys dismantled, enemies neutralized before they could be named. But at night, in the rare hours of rest, she sat alone with her hands folded and thought of the recruits at Camp Grayson, the whispers, the stares, and the one soldier who hadn't looked away. Ren Bishop. She remembered the way the girl had watched, eyes sharp, seeing what others ignored. She remembered the clapping that broke the silence after the 83 seconds. It hadn't been applause, it had been recognition. And for the first time in years, Eden felt the faintest flicker of something dangerous. Hope. Back at Grayson, Bishop's defiance began to attract attention. She trained harder, stayed later, asked sharper questions. Danner noticed. Harrow noticed. Even Quinn, who had tried to warn her, noticed. One evening, Quinn pulled her aside. "You need to be careful, Bishop." "Why?" "Because curiosity doesn't just get you noticed, it gets you erased." Bishop held her gaze. Then maybe she was erased so the rest of us would never know what's possible. Quinn's expression softened, just slightly. Or maybe she was erased because knowing too much changes you. But Bishop wasn't afraid of change. She was afraid of silence. And so she made a choice. She wouldn't stop until she found Eden Kess again. Because if Eden had been a mistake in the system, then maybe mistakes were the only truth left. How far would you go for someone you barely knew? Ren Bishop asked herself that question every night. She replayed Eden's silence, her scars, her precision. Most of all, she replayed that single moment after the 83 seconds, when Eden didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't even acknowledge victory. She simply walked away as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Bishop had never seen strength like that. And once you've seen it, how do you go back to pretending it doesn't exist? Weeks turned to months. Camp Grayson cycled through drills, evaluations, and endless attempts to crush individuality. But for Bishop, the noise of training blurred into the background. Her focus stayed sharp on a single point: finding Eden. She started small, asking questions at the edges, listening to instructors' side comments, piecing together fragments from logistics reports. The trail was always thin, deliberately erased, but she found cracks if she pressed hard enough. Once she overheard two officers talking outside the mess. Black file should have been closed years ago. Then why put her here? Test maybe, or mistake, doesn't matter, she's gone now. Another time, she caught sight of a sealed envelope with the word archive stamped across it before it disappeared into Commander Quinn's hands. Each fragment added weight, not answers but proof that answers existed, proof that Eden hadn't vanished, she'd been buried. And Bishop couldn't shake the feeling that if Eden was still out there, then maybe her story wasn't finished. Maybe it was only beginning. One night Bishop slipped into the comms wing. She wasn't supposed to be there. Unauthorized personnel weren't even allowed near the door. But she had studied patrol routes, timing her movements between guards, heart hammering so loud she feared it would give her away. She pulled open the logbooks. Hundreds of entries, calls, signals, transfers. Most of it was noise, until she saw it. A transmission routed to a facility that didn't have a name, coordinates only, no designation, no return line. The date matched the morning Eden disappeared from Camp Grayson. Bishop traced the coordinates onto her notepad. A desert, not this one farther east. Remote, empty, forgotten. Her hands trembled. She folded the note, tucked it into her boot. She had her first real lead. But leads come with cost. The next morning, Sergeant Danner called her out in front of formation. His eyes were sharp, colder than usual. "Private Bishop," he barked, "front and center." She stepped forward, chin high, forcing her voice not to shake. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Danner sneered. "Think we don't see you chasing ghosts?" Bishop said nothing. He leaned closer, voice low enough only she could hear. "Drop it, or you'll disappear just like her." The words chilled her, but they didn't stop her, because fear wasn't enough anymore, not after what she'd seen. Miles away in the nameless desert facility, Eden was already awake. She never really slept. Her missions had stripped that from her years ago. Nightmares replaced rest. Silence replaced dreams. She sat in a dim-lit corridor, boots laced, hands steady, waiting for orders. Around her, the air smelled of oil and steel. Men passed without looking at her, as if she were part of the walls themselves. She liked it that way. But even ghosts feel eyes sometimes. She caught it once during a briefing. A young technician staring too long at the tattoo on her arm before quickly looking away. Another time, she noticed a classified file closed too fast when she entered the room. She wasn't supposed to exist, and yet here she was, walking proof of something the military had tried to bury. Proof has a way of making people nervous. Her missions blurred together. Neutralize a smuggling ring in the hills. Secure stolen data before it crossed borders. Extract a hostage no one would admit was missing. Always precise. Always clean. Never acknowledged. And yet, the silence afterward grew heavier each time, because efficiency doesn't erase memory. Each life she took, each target neutralized, became another stone added to the weight she carried. At night, when the facility fell quiet, Eden thought of the recruits. She thought of the way they had stared as she dropped 5 men in under a minute. She thought of the silence afterward, broken by one sound: clapping. Ren Bishop. Eden didn't know why she remembered her face so clearly. She trained alongside hundreds, fought beside dozens, buried too many. But that girl, the one who had seen through the mask, the one who had recognized instead of ridiculed, she lingered. Maybe because recognition was rarer than survival. Maybe because it was the one thing Eden hadn't expected to find again. Back at Grayson, Bishop couldn't let go. She began training harder than before, pushing past exhaustion. Her rifle scores tightened. Her runs became precise, rhythmic, as if she were chasing Eden's ghost with every stride. Other recruits noticed. "You're gonna burn out," Delaney warned one night, watching her collapse onto her bunk after extra drills. Bishop shook her head. "Not burn out, break through." He stared at her. Break through to what? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she knew was that Eden had changed her. Seeing her had ripped the veil off the world. There were levels of discipline, of strength, of survival that training manuals couldn't touch. And if Bishop couldn't find Eden, then maybe the only way to honor her was to become something more than ordinary herself. But a fire that bright can't stay hidden. Commander Quinn summoned her after evening drills. The office was dark, blinds drawn, one lamp casting shadows across her desk. Quinn's face looked older than Bishop had ever seen it. "You're going to get yourself killed," Quinn said. Bishop swallowed hard. "By training harder. By chasing something you can't catch. She's gone, Bishop, gone where you can't follow." Bishop met her gaze. "Then why do you look like you don't believe that yourself?" For a long moment, Quinn said nothing. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There are things you don't understand. Units that don't officially exist. Files that get erased because they're too dangerous to be read. Eden Kess wasn't supposed to be here, and you weren't supposed to notice her." "I did," Bishop whispered. Quinn's expression hardened. "Then stop, before someone notices you noticing." But Bishop couldn't. Because once you've seen someone rewrite the rules, you can't go back to pretending the rules are permanent. That night, Bishop unfolded the coordinates she'd stolen. She stared at them until her vision blurred. A desert, a facility, a chance. She didn't know how she would get there. She didn't know what she would find. But she knew one thing. Eden Kess hadn't been erased. She'd been hidden. And Bishop wasn't going to stop until she brought her back into the light. Miles away in that nameless facility, Eden sat alone in her bunk, staring at the scars on her arms. She thought of the crossed-out line on her tattoo, a death that never was. She whispered into the dark, not loud, barely audible. "Not yet." She didn't know why she said it, or who she said it for. But somewhere out there, someone was listening. What do you do when the truth you chase could destroy you? Ren Bishop asked herself that every step outside the gates of Camp Grayson. She wasn't authorized. She wasn't cleared. If she was caught, her career wouldn't end, it would vanish, erased like Eden's file. But something inside her refused to let go. The coordinates burned in her boot like a secret too heavy to carry. A facility in the desert, nameless, hidden. It was madness to go looking, but madness felt safer than silence. She hitched rides under cover of night, slipping onto convoys hauling supplies east. She offered to haul boxes, scrub tires, anything for a few miles. Most drivers didn't care. One more recruit moving gear wasn't unusual. No one asked why her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Days blurred into one another. Heat by day, cold by night, every step deeper into nothing. Every mile closer to the coordinates scribbled on a scrap of paper. And with each mile, her fear shifted. It wasn't of getting caught anymore. It was of what she might find. Because if Eden was there, what would she even say? "I saw you, I can't forget you, teach me, save me, prove I'm not crazy for believing in you." She didn't have the words, she only had the need. Miles away, Eden Kess was already in motion. Her orders had come at dawn. No insignia, no brief, just a sealed packet and a convoy waiting at the perimeter of the facility. She opened the packet once, read it twice, burned it in a tin cup. Target, communications relay hidden inside a civilian compound. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was routing encrypted signals to 3 separate enemy states. Her team, 4 men she didn't know, didn't need to know. Their eyes flicked to her, wary, confused. They hadn't expected her. They hadn't been told why she was there. Ghosts weren't supposed to join the living. She didn't speak, didn't explain. She checked her rifle, adjusted her scope, moved to the edge of the convoy. The men exchanged looks but said nothing. The compound appeared at dusk. Low buildings, antennas disguised as laundry lines, a hum of activity just under the surface. To any outsider, it looked like a village clinging to survival. To Eden, it looked like a threat wrapped in human camouflage. Her orders were clear: eliminate the relay, extract data, leave no trace. But orders never see the faces. Through her scope, she watched children play in the dust, watched women hang clothes on lines that masked signals, watched men carry buckets from wells, and beneath it all, the faint pulse of encrypted transmissions spiking across her lens. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her breathing slowed, her pulse steadied. The mission began. Back in the desert, Bishop stumbled into a roadside settlement at sunset. Sand stung her eyes, her throat dry as ash. She had no cover story ready, no plan, just exhaustion and determination. She asked for water. The locals eyed her suspiciously. She handed over half her pay, coins clinking on a worn table. A pitcher slid her way. As she drank, she overheard 2 traders arguing, something about a military ghost. A woman, no insignia, no name. Her heart nearly stopped. She leaned closer. Where? The men stared at her, then laughed. Even if we knew, you wouldn't want to find her. Bishop forced her hands not to shake. Maybe I would. They didn't answer, but one of them glanced east toward the ridge line, the same direction as her coordinates. Her chest tightened. She paid for a seat on the back of their cart, eastward, always eastward. By nightfall, Eden's mission was unraveling. Her team had breached the outer walls, moving like shadows, but shadows make mistakes. One of them kicked over a bucket. The sound echoed like thunder. Doors burst open. Shouts filled the air. Civilians? No, armed fighters, weapons pulled from hidden caches. The village wasn't just cover, it was part of the network. Gunfire erupted. Chaos tore through the night. Eden moved like silence itself, weaving between bursts of light and sound. She neutralized threats with surgical precision: a shoulder, a knee, a throat. Non-lethal when she could, final when she couldn't. Her team wasn't as disciplined. They panicked, fired wild. Civilians screamed. A child cried in the dust. The mission fractured into shards of noise and blood. Eden reached the relay, tore the casing from its frame, ripped the drives free. Sparks spat into the air. She shoved the data into her pack. The job was done. But the silence afterward wasn't victory. It was grief. Because no matter how clean her strikes had been, the ground still carried blood. And ghosts don't leave footprints without a cost. At dawn, Bishop crested the ridgeline. Her body ached. Her boots were torn. But below she saw it: fences coiled with barbed wire, steel doors sunk into the earth. A facility hidden in plain sight. She crouched low, heart pounding. She didn't have clearance, she didn't have a plan, but she had eyes, and she would use them. Through binoculars she'd stolen from a convoy, she scanned the compound. Trucks, armed guards, and there, a convoy returning. A figure stepping down, civilian boots, gray shirt, the same steady gait. Eden. Bishop's throat tightened. She wanted to run down, scream her name, prove she hadn't been chasing smoke. But she froze, because Eden didn't look up, didn't look around. She moved like someone carrying weight too heavy to share. Bishop lowered the binoculars. Recognition was one thing, reaching her was another. The facility swallowed Eden whole. Bishop whispered into the dust, voice cracking. "I found you." But the desert swallowed her words. Inside, Eden dropped her pack on the table. The drives clattered out. A technician snatched them up, disappearing into a side room without a word. Her commander nodded once. Mission complete. No praise, no acknowledgement, just another shadow filed into silence. Eden sat on the edge of her bunk that night, staring at her hands. They were steady, always steady, but her chest ached. Her mind replayed the child's cry, the mother's scream, the blood-staining sand. She had followed orders. She had succeeded. So why did it feel like failure? Maybe because ghosts aren't supposed to care. Maybe because she wasn't a ghost anymore. And miles away, hidden in the rocks outside the facility, Ren Bishop swore to herself. She wasn't leaving without answers, even if it meant becoming a ghost too. What happens when you stop watching from the outside and finally step across the line? Ren Bishop had been staring at the compound for 3 nights. She barely slept, barely ate, surviving on ration bars and water stolen from supply drops. She watched the convoys come and go, watched guards rotate in predictable patterns, watched Eden walk across the yard, always calm, always silent, always swallowed back into the steel doors before Bishop could breathe her name. Every night she whispered the same words into the dust, "I see you, I won't stop." But watching wasn't enough anymore. On the 4th night, Bishop made her decision. She would go in. The risk wasn't survival. The risk was vanishing. If she was caught, there would be no trial, no record. She'd disappear into the same silence Eden had been buried in. But silence already haunted her. Better to risk being erased for trying than to erase herself by doing nothing. She mapped the compound carefully. Guard towers here, patrols there. A blind corner where floodlights overlapped and left one strip of shadow. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. At 200 hours she moved, crawling low, her hands scraping rock, her chest pressed flat against sand. Every step closer, her heart hammered harder, but she forced her breathing into rhythm, just like the runs she'd timed. 7:45 per mile. Consistency, calibration. Eden had taught her that without a word. She reached the fence. Barbed wire twisted above her like claws. She pulled out the cutters she'd stolen days before. Each snip felt like thunder in her ears. She froze after every sound, waiting for shouts, for lights, for alarms. None came. She slipped through the gap, clothes snagging, skin tearing. Pain stung, but she kept moving. Shadows swallowed her. Inside, the compound smelled of oil, dust, and secrecy. She ducked behind crates, pressed herself against walls, waited for footsteps to pass. Her body trembled with adrenaline, but her mind was sharper than ever. Every decision felt clean, every move precise. She wasn't just chasing Eden anymore. She was becoming her. Deeper inside, Eden Kess sat at a steel table, a file spread in front of her. Another mission, another target. Her commander's voice droned on, but Eden wasn't listening. Not fully, because something had shifted. She had felt it for days now, a prickle at the edge of her awareness, a weight in the air. Someone was watching. Not like the commanders, not like the technicians. Their stares were cold, calculating. This was different, warmer, sharper, familiar. Her fingers brushed the scar on her forearm. She closed her eyes. For a moment she thought she saw a face, wide-eyed, determined, younger than it had any right to be. Ren Bishop. Eden exhaled slowly. No, it couldn't be. The girl was still at Camp Grayson, still following orders, still safe. She had to be. But the unease wouldn't leave her. That night, as Eden walked across the yard under floodlights, her eyes flicked just once toward the ridgeline. The guards didn't notice. No one did. But Ren Bishop, crouched in the dark, noticed. Eden had looked up. Her throat tightened, her chest ached. It was only a glance, a second, but it was enough. The connection was alive. Bishop pressed deeper into the facility. Corridors stretched before her, lined with locked doors, buzzing with fluorescent lights. She kept moving, every nerve alive with danger. She passed rooms filled with screens, men watching signals, past storage bays stacked with crates stamped with codes she didn't understand. And then a sound. Footsteps. She ducked into a side alcove, heart hammering. Two men passed, voices low. Another mission tomorrow. She doesn't ask, doesn't argue, just executes like a machine. Not a machine, a relic that's worse. You think command knows what they've unleashed. They know, they just don't care. The voices faded, Bishop's chest burned. A relic. Was that what Eden was now? Something old, dangerous, better buried than remembered. She clenched her fists. No, Eden wasn't a relic, she was proof. Proof that survival could look like silence. Proof that strength didn't need applause. And proof that sometimes the system's biggest mistake was underestimating the quiet ones. She crept further until she reached a dorm wing. Rows of doors, bunks inside, empty most of them, but one door had a faint light beneath it. Bishop pressed her ear to the steel. Silence. Then movement, a faint shift, the scrape of boots. Her breath caught, she didn't need to see, she knew. Eden was inside. For a moment, Bishop nearly opened the door, nearly threw caution into the dark and stepped across the line completely. But her hand froze on the handle, because what if Eden didn't welcome her? What if Eden turned her in? What if the woman she had built into a symbol didn't want to be found? She backed away, heart aching. Sometimes survival means patience. She would wait, watch, find her moment. Inside, Eden sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at her hands. She had felt something outside her door, a presence, a shadow that wasn't hostile. She closed her eyes. Not yet, she whispered again. The same words she had spoken weeks ago, without knowing why. This time she understood. Someone was out there, someone stubborn enough to chase her into the dark. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. What happens when the ghost you chase finally turns and sees you? Ren Bishop had been living in shadows for 3 days inside the compound. She moved between corridors at night, hiding in storage bays during the day, her body surviving on scraps of food lifted from supply rooms. Every moment was risk. Every sound could end her. But every glimpse of Eden made it worth it. She saw her walking across the yard, saw her entering briefing rooms, saw her return late, shoulders heavy, eyes hollow. Eden carried herself like someone already half buried, a body moving because it had to, a soul carrying weight no one else could touch. Bishop wanted to speak, to step out of hiding and say her name, but silence held her back. She feared breaking the illusion, feared Eden might deny her, send her away, erase the fragile thread connecting them. But threads stretch only so far before they snap. On the 4th night, alarms blared. A mission had gone wrong. Eden's team returned under fire, 2 men bleeding, 1 carried on a stretcher. The compound erupted with motion, medics rushing, officers shouting, doors slamming. In the chaos, Bishop was shoved against a wall, nearly exposed. And then through the storm, she saw Eden. Blood streaked across her sleeve, not her own. Her face was calm, steady, but her eyes burned with something Bishop hadn't seen before. Not precision, not calculation, fury. For a moment, Eden's gaze swept the corridor and landed on Bishop. It wasn't long, a second, 2 at most, but recognition sparked. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. Bishop's chest tightened. She didn't breathe until Eden disappeared into the med bay. That night, Bishop couldn't stay hidden anymore. She found the courage to do what she'd come for. When the compound finally fell quiet, she crept to Eden's door. Her hand hovered on the handle. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "You can't keep chasing forever." She opened it. Eden sat on the edge of her bunk, waiting. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them felt alive. Bishop's throat ached with everything she wanted to say. Eden's eyes carried everything she wouldn't. Finally, Bishop whispered, "I found you." Eden tilted her head slightly, studying her. You shouldn't have. I couldn't stop. Eden's gaze sharpened, but not with anger. Why? Bishop's voice cracked. Because you're the only proof I've ever seen that we don't have to be what they tell us to be. You don't break. You don't bend. You just endure. And if I let them erase you, then what does that say about the rest of us? Eden's silence was heavy. Her hands folded together, scars catching the dim light. For years she had carried those scars alone, letting them speak for her. But this girl, this recruit with fire in her chest, refused to let them stay silent. You don't understand, Eden said softly. They buried me for a reason. If they see you here, they'll bury you too. Then let them try, Bishop whispered. For the first time, Eden's composure cracked. A flicker of something human crossed her face. Not anger, not fear, something closer to sorrow. You think strength is what you saw in those 83 seconds, Eden said. But strength isn't dropping 5 men. It's living with why you had to. And that weight doesn't leave. Not ever. Bishop shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. Then let me carry some of it with you. Eden froze. No one had ever said that to her. Not commanders, not teammates, not anyone. Her life had been orders and silence, survival and scars, carrying everything alone because that was the only way to endure. And now here was this stubborn, reckless recruit, offering to share the weight. Eden closed her eyes. For the first time in years she let herself exhale, not controlled, not precise, just human. When she opened them again, she spoke quietly. You shouldn't have found me, but you did, and that means something. Bishop nodded, tears slipping free. Neither noticed the shadow in the doorway until it moved. Commander Vexley. Her voice was cold. So this is what happens when you leave threads untied. Bishop spun, heart slamming against her ribs. Eden didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on Vexley's, steady as stone. You can't erase everyone, Eden said calmly. Vexley's gaze narrowed. No, but I can erase enough. For a moment the air held. Bishop braced for alarms, for guards, for force. But instead, Vexley stepped back into the hall. Tomorrow morning, she said flatly, both of you will be gone, different places, different files, pretend you never met. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut. Bishop turned, panic rising. She's going to. She's warning us, Eden interrupted. That's all she can do. Then what do we? Eden shook her head. We survive, that's all there's ever been. But Bishop wasn't satisfied with survival anymore, not after finding her. The hours that followed blurred. At dawn, Bishop was dragged from the compound, shoved into a convoy, her wrists bound. No explanation, no record, just erasure. Eden watched from a window as the trucks rolled away. Her face revealed nothing, but her hand, hidden by her sleeve, curled into a fist. Because she understood now. Ghosts don't stay buried forever. Weeks later, Ren Bishop woke in a new camp. Different instructors, different drills. Her record rewritten as if Camp Grayson had never existed. She should have felt broken. She didn't. Because she carried something with her. A memory, a truth, proof that Eden Kess had been real, proof that strength could live in silence, proof that sometimes recognition matters more than orders. She carried it like a hidden weapon. And somewhere else, in another desert, Eden walked alone across a yard under floodlights. Her eyes flicked up, just once, toward the horizon. Not expecting to see anyone. But hopping quietly, that someone still remembered. Because sometimes strength doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even fight. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.